A mother's determination to find her missing daughter leads to the discovery of many other lost daughters. This is the Shannan Gilbert story. Good afternoon, Amy.
Hi, Meghan. So good to see you.
Well, today's case is the last of our movies inspired by real crime series, which I know we've both enjoyed, but this one was a must for me for a couple of reasons. So let me begin with the movie. In case you don't know it, it's Lost Girls on Netflix. And while not your typical box office release, it is a powerhouse of a film that tells the story of Shannan Gilbert, her mother Mary, and the other missing women whose cases need attention from law enforcement and the media. But these are the cases that we've discussed before on our show who don't receive the kind of spotlight they need because of who the women are and what they did for a living.
Meghan, did you see this movie before the idea for the episode came, or you had watched the movie because of the episode?
I saw it before, and I watched it again for the episode as well. I was very personally affected by this one, not just because of the people it highlights, but because of the location. So, without giving away the entire story, I can just tell you that major events in today's case took place at a beach on Long Island where I grew up and where many of my friends and I used to go.
Wait, does this have anything to do with the Gilgo murders, or this is something separate?
Well, you're just going to have to stay with me and listen and find out.
Okay.
I don't know how it feels to you, Amy, though, but when these cases happen close to home, it feels more personal. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not personal, it feels that way. So
I agree.
I felt more of a personal connection in that regard just because of where this happens, and I hope I do the story justice.
Sure you will.
Thank you. So now let's meet the woman at the center of today's case. Born in October of 1986 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Shannan Maria Gilbert was the eldest daughter of Mary Gilbert, having 3 younger sisters. Just 23 years old, Shannan was a petite young woman, but she had big dreams. Shannan was a very smart girl book-wise, according to her mother, and having graduated from high school 2 years early at age 16, I think her book smarts were obvious. Mm-hmm. Shannan was very interested in show business, but also knew the value in seeking an education, which is why she was taking online college courses at the time she disappeared. But Shannan and her sisters had a very rough childhood, with Shannan placed in foster care on at least 2 occasions when Mary had trouble caring for her daughter, who had also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Did she also have substance abuse issues or just struggled with mental health?
We'll get into substance use later, but I don't believe there was substance abuse per se, or if there was, I don't know if it happened early on. It seemed to me this was a mental health disorder, bipolar disorder, but there was a lot of instability in the home. Mm-hmm. At least 2 of Shannan's sisters were molested by one of Mary's boyfriends, which left a serious scar on their relationships with their mother and likely caused this really huge instability in the household, which is one of the reasons why Shannan sought to leave the home at an early age. And in 2007, she moved to Jersey City with her boyfriend.
You know Jersey City. You lived there with your boyfriend.
I know. It's like, yes. And I also was like, wow, okay, from Long Island to Jersey City. A lot of the locations, again, familiar to me. Now, unfortunately for Shannan, she left a tough environment only to find herself getting into an even more difficult one. Shannan's boyfriend physically abused her and at one time broke her jaw, for which Shannan had to have a titanium plate inserted into her mouth to treat this horrific injury. I have to imagine this was so painful. Shannan also began working as an escort to support herself and attend college, which is a dangerous occupation. So we know that her mother, Mary, knew her daughter was doing this kind of work, but Mary also had significant financial challenges raising her other daughters, and at times Shannan would help Mary financially with bills. Now, Mary still did not want her daughter to earn money this way, likely realizing the real danger that Shannan was in. And it wasn't long before Mary's fears would be realized. In the early morning of May 10th, 2010, at approximately 2 a.m., when Shannan arrived to meet a client in the private beach community of Oak Beach, Long Island.
Do you know where that is?
I do. Do you? Aren't you from Long Island too?
Yeah, but that doesn't sound familiar to me. So I was just wondering if you knew.
Oh, yes. Sorry. No, this is a gated community. It's located at the eastern end of the much larger Jones Beach of Long Island.
Oh, I know Jones Beach. Okay.
Yes, yes. Jones Beach is a 6 or 7 mile beach that separates the South Bay of Long Island from the Atlantic Ocean. So it's what we would call a barrier island, if you will. I know that I grew up on this beach and I spent a lot of time in Jones Beach. Did you as well?
No, I don't think so. I've heard of it, but remember, I only lived in Long Island for part of my childhood. And I feel like a lot of people went there for concerts and stuff as they got older. Like, did you go see a lot of good shows there?
Yes, my first show was Tina Turner at Jones Beach.
Okay.
Tina Turner and Wang Chung. I'm really dating myself. Anyway, okay. Back to Shannan. So Shannan was taken to the residence of 46-year-old Oak Beach resident Joseph Brewer by her driver then, Michael Pack. Joseph Brewer was an out-of-work financial advisor, and he was separated from his wife at the time. Now, her driver, Michael Pack, waited outside while Shannan went into the house to meet with her client, Brewer. At approximately 4:51 a.m., though, something went horribly wrong. Shannan placed a phone call to 911 that lasted for almost 24 minutes, and this call would become the center of the controversy of Shannan's disappearance. Now, I encourage everyone to listen to this because it is public now, though it took years for the call to become public. Shannan begins her call by saying, "There's somebody after me." She's speaking quietly, though. It sounds like she's inside of a house, so she's probably trying not to be heard. Maybe she's in a bathroom or another room. Now, the 911 operator asks Shannan her location, but she doesn't know it, hoping that they can trace the call. Shortly after, 2 male voices can be heard on the 911 call. One was presumably Joseph Brewer, the occupant of the house, and the other was her driver, Michael Pack. Now, there's some discrepancy over what they were saying, but I can tell you that a lot of this has been transcribed now, and they can definitely at one point be heard saying, "Let's go, Shannan." Okay, let's go. But you can hear Shannan repeatedly saying, "No, stop, please stop." And then at times you hear Shannan saying, "You're going to kill me," and asking, "Were you part of this all along?" To which Pack responds, "No, I just met him." Now, all this time, Shannan keeps her phone on and the 911 call keeps recording. You can hear continued conversation between Shannan and her driver, Pack, in which he's repeatedly saying, "Let's go back, Shannan, let's go back." It sounds like he's trying to coax her out of the house. At about 16 minutes, Shannan can be heard fleeing from the house. You can hear her running through the door and stomping into the deck outside.
I would like to think that 911 had already had police on the way.
Absolutely not.
What?
They did not.
There's clearly a struggle going on, and they're just listening to it? I don't understand.
Apparently, they could not trace her call because they did not send anyone out.
They couldn't trace it. Okay.
Keep that in mind for later on because I'll tell you what actually happened.
Okay, because we're talking 2010, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
After Shannan flees the house, it sounds like someone is still trying to get Shannan to come with them. It sounds like Pack is still saying, "Come on, Shannan." But as she fled, Shannan lost her earring and jacket along the way. Just keep that in mind. These were items found near Brewer's deck later on. Shannan proceeds to run to a neighbor's house, and this is at about minute 18 of the call, knocking loudly on the door and asking for help at about 5:22 a.m. So the neighbor, Gus Coletti, asks Shannan if she's okay, and she says she needs help, that someone is chasing her. So Gus Coletti calls 911, but Shannan begs him not to call the police and then runs off again when Coletti makes the call. So she's asking him for help, but seemingly doesn't want him to call 911. Coletti reported the vehicle he saw following Shannan. It apparently seemed like her driver, Michael Pack, was actually following her in an attempt to maybe get her to come with him, get back in the car.
This is so scary. I could not imagine, this just seems like it was dragging on for, how many minutes are we at now?
That was at minute 18. And then a few minutes later, Shannan loudly knocks on the door of resident Barbara Brenna, who also called 911. but who did not let Shannan in her home as she was afraid for her own safety at the time. She had, I think, her elderly mother there. And, if you have someone knocking on your door hysterical at that time, you might be a little bit afraid.
Yeah.
But she did call 911. But then Shannan ran off again and her 911 call ended. And that was the last known time Shannan Gilbert was heard from or seen. But what happened to her after she ran from Brennan's home early in those hours is a mystery and a source of much controversy to this day. 2 days later, Shannan Gilbert's boyfriend contacted her mother and her family to say that Shannan had left the home 2 days prior, but had not been back. Now, her boyfriend knew what she did for work as well, so perhaps that's the reason why he didn't immediately grow concerned. Also, remember, this is the same boyfriend who broke her jaw, just to be clear.
Yeah, he doesn't sound like he would be too concerned anyway about her.
Exactly. Not the best boyfriend, right? But Shannan's family was very worried once he contacted them, and they immediately filed a missing persons report. With no news about a week after Shannan was last seen, Mary Gilbert and her daughters drove approximately 140 miles from their home in upstate New York to Oak Beach, Long Island, where they began to post flyers and knock on doors. They were going to get some answers one way or the other. The police interviewed both Joseph Brewer and Michael Pack, who told similar stories. So most of what is known came from Michael Pack. Now, he said, remember, this is her driver. I often refer to him as Pack in this episode. He said that he dropped Shannan off around 2 a.m. and waited in the car for her, playing some online poker games, until around 5 a.m. when Brewer came outside and asked for his help getting Shannan to leave the house. So this is about 3 hours after Shannan arrived.
This driver usually waited around? That was like their...
Yes.
Okay.
It's so they drive them to and make sure that they get home safely.
Okay.
It's usually a safety measure for the women. Pack says at 5 a.m. when Brewer asked him, he went inside to find Shannan seemingly panicked, but according to Pack, also a bit delirious and refusing to leave with him. Frustrated, he went out to wait in the car, and minutes later, he says Shannan ran out past him, and that's when he followed her in his SUV for several minutes before eventually leaving to head back to Manhattan without Shannan. The police didn't arrive, just so you know, you asked about this, until 45 minutes after Gus Coletti was the one who called 911. Remember that neighbor? They came when he called 911. Now, apparently there was some confusion over Shannan's call, and because of her inability to give any type of location, I believe they transferred her call to the New York State Police. So I'm not sure how that impacted their response time, but it really was in response to Gus Coletti that they came. And by the way, they still did not come for 45 minutes. He calls at 5:22 saying there's a girl who's terrified running through the neighborhood. And we're still talking about all that time later. So, I mean, this is way too long. By the time they arrive, too, there is no sign of Michael Pack, Shannan Gilbert, or anyone else. According to Pack, Shannan had also called him from inside the house close to 3 a.m. to get her some items at a drugstore. But he said no, he didn't know the area and he didn't want to go to a drugstore. He was just supposed to stay there with her.
What items?
Well, he says it was like items related like lube and a deck of playing cards.
Okay.
Which was kind of interesting. Now, after he said no, apparently Shannan and Brewer left the house for about 15 minutes together and returned. Interestingly, there's no record that they ever entered a CVS on surveillance, but Shannan's phone records show that she placed a call to a CVS at about 3 a.m. It's weird. Most actually feel that the pair likely went out and bought illicit drugs and that Brewer didn't want to confess to this illegal activity. But I feel like while that seems likely, Shannan still placed that call to a CVS. So it did seem like she wanted to go to the drugstore for a reason and maybe didn't make it there for one reason or the other. After they interviewed Brewer and Pack, searching Brewer's home and vehicle as well, the police concluded that no evidence tied them to Shannan's disappearance. But Amy, there was another suspect who inserted himself into the investigation early on. So one of the oddest parts of this case might just be the entrance of Dr. Peter Hackett, a retired emergency services physician and resident of Oak Beach. Hackett placed a call to Mary Gilbert, Shannan's mother, just 2 days after Shannan vanished. On this call, Hackett claimed that he ran a home for wayward girls and that Shannan had been staying there, but had suddenly left the morning that Shannan actually vanished. This was complete shock to Mary. First of all, she didn't know Shannan to be staying with anyone named Peter Hackett. Secondly, at this point, Mary had not yet been alerted that Shannan was even missing.
Oh.
So why is Peter Hackett calling and saying this? Hackett later denied placing this call to the police, then changing his story, after which he said, oh yeah, I did call Mary Gilbert later in that week because I had heard about her case and I wanted to offer support to her mother.
That's shady.
Very, very odd. When asked, he said that he never said that he ran, this halfway house for girls or that Shannan had been there. But Mary Gilbert was certain he had said that. Also, just so you know, the phone records did confirm that he called Mary Gilbert exactly when she said he did, even though he kept changing his own story.
Yeah, interesting.
So Peter Hackett's role here is very much unknown. However, it is very odd. And at this point, Shannan had vanished into thin air. But 7 months later, there would be a big break in the case. In December of 2010, a Suffolk County detective's cadaver dog alerted to human remains at Gilgo Beach, which is part of Jones Beach Island in Babylon, New York, and just 3 miles away from Joseph Brewer's home.
Now, I have a feeling I know this answer, but they were looking for something. I'm assuming that's why the dogs were out there. Were they looking for her or something else?
There have been mixed reports.
Okay.
So the reason I left it open is because some say it was a training exercise. I read someone else said the officer just happened to be out there literally stopping on the side of the road, maybe even to relieve himself. However, there's other opinions that they had been looking very much for Shannan still, and this was still part of searching the area. So let's just say, for our purposes, that again, the cadaver dog alerted to human remains. And while this was a shocking finding, the police believed that they had just found the remains of Shannan Gilbert, which were just skeletal remains at this point. But they were surprised when just 2 days later and a second search of the area revealed 3 more sets of bones, none of which belonged to Shannan. So who are these victims, and did they relate to Shannan Gilbert's disappearance? The 4 women, who are often referred to as the Gilgo 4, they have names and they had lives before they were ended so soon. And while this episode is focused on Shannan Gilbert's case, I'd like to briefly introduce the 4 women found on that day. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, age 25, went missing on July 9th, 2007. Maureen was a mother of 2 who worked hard to provide for her children, but who also faced significant financial challenges. She was about to get evicted and applied for many jobs, but she could not get them, likely because she didn't have more than a GED. So she turned to sex work to support her children. And she left her home in Groton, Connecticut for New York City to meet with a client and never returned home again. Her family reported her missing, but said that they were left to search on their own since the police did not take the claim seriously based on Maureen's status as a sex worker, which I don't think surprises either one of us. Melissa Bartholomew, age 24, disappeared on July 12, 2009. Melissa went to beauty school and worked as a hairdresser, moving from Buffalo, New York to New York City to continue her work. But Melissa also worked as an escort, advertising on Craigslist, which the other women did as well. So when her mother reported her missing, the police weren't very interested until her sister began to receive calls from a strange man who claimed to have done horrible things to Melissa, who was still missing. So her sister said that she started getting these calls from a man who was taunting her, saying he had sexually assaulted her sister and murdered her, and laughing about it. She was terrified.
Did she call the police?
Yes. At this point, the police tapped her phone and were able to get some location information on the caller and some demographic information, but not an exact location or his identity before the call stopped. Meghan Waterman, age 22, went missing on June 6, 2010. Meghan lived in Scarborough, Maine with her mother and young daughter. Her relationship with her mother was strained during Meghan's childhood due to her mother's drinking, but once her mother got sober, they mended their relationship. Meghan was described as a very bubbly young woman and a loving mother herself. Unfortunately for Meghan, her boyfriend, who was also her pimp, left her alone the evening she disappeared instead of staying with her when she was meeting with a client like he usually had done. Meghan left behind her 4-year-old daughter and a mother who vowed to find her daughter and the person responsible for her disappearance. Finally, Amber Costello, age 27, went missing on September 2nd, 2010. Amber was enticed by a client who offered to pay $1,500 for her to stay the evening, which was several times what she was used to making as an online escort. Now, Amber had a very difficult life, marked with serious addiction to heroin, and her older sister, who also worked as an escort, had introduced Amber to that lifestyle, something she would later come to regret. Amber turned to Craigslist and was not as discriminating about the jobs she took towards the end, as the jobs were mostly to support her drug use at that time. Sadly, Amber was not reported missing because her sister didn't think the police would care, and I'm not sure that she was wrong. These women were victims, but they were also mothers, daughters, friends, and human beings, much more than just their label of sex workers. And they were the first 4 to be found, but not the last. Over the course of several months, the police found 6 more sets of human remains, one of whom was a baby girl possibly related to one of the female remains found, and another who was a young Asian male.
Meghan, this was all in the same general area, but how far apart from each other?
Same general area, but those remains were found some distance. I'm not exactly sure how far from the original bodies of the 4 young women I described above.
It's still considered the same beach, though?
Yes.
Okay.
In all of these 10 bodies found, autopsies revealed that 8 of them had been strangled or suffocated to death. They were now searching for a serial killer. But still, 10 months after she vanished, Shannan Gilbert was nowhere to be found.
Were the police suspecting at this point that she was also a victim of the same person who killed these other women?
I think so.
Yeah.
They wouldn't say it on the record, but I think that was probably what they had thought at this time. Imagine, I don't know if you remember, but the press was all over this. The shock of finding all of these bodies and remains on a beach that was, a family beach, a kid beach. It was incredibly shocking to everyone. But Mary Gilbert was not about to sit around and let her daughter's disappearance go unnoticed. She was very vocal. She hired her own attorney and applied a lot of pressure to Suffolk County Police to keep looking for Shannan. The other families of the victims, they kind of formed an informal support group, holding vigils and also trying to keep the spotlight on their loved ones. But it was Mary who really demanded the investigation keep going. And it was Mary who really took center stage at press conferences. Mary was not liked by everyone, just so you know. She was outspoken, confrontational, very rough around the edges, but she was absolutely determined to have her daughter found no matter what. And Mary had demanded that the police go back and search the marsh near Joseph Brewer's home, something they had not done for months. And when they went back and conducted the search, they found Shannan's remains. But the medical examiner said that her cause of death was undetermined, and the police believed, get this, Amy, that it was no more than an accident.
What?
So the theory here is that Shannan was very disoriented and she became exhausted running around. It was late in the evening. They believe she might have been on some type of drugs, even though the toxicology did not reveal drugs in her system. There was some dispute over whether or not the remains were too decomposed to actually provide accurate results. So the police believed that Shannan had been running into the marsh, that she got lost in there, that she became confused, that, by the way, she took off her clothes along the way, or that the mud dragged the jeans off of her body and that she succumbed to the elements, either drowning or dying of exposure.
That's absurd.
Well, her family's attorney, John Ray, believes the theory was ridiculous. He worked to get Mary and Shannan's sister information for years, lobbying, by the way, for that 911 call to be released and pressing for the police to further investigate Joseph Brewer and Michael Pack and Peter Hackett. According to Ray, he believes that Shannan was murdered, but he's faced resistance at every turn. And this was not surprising given the huge scandal that erupted a few years after the remains of these women were found. Then Police Chief James Burke, who had taken over in 2012, was sentenced to 4 years in prison in 2016 for beating a man in 2012 for stealing a duffel bag from his car. Okay, so the victim, who was addicted to drugs at the time and was a petty thief, he stole Burke's bag, which contained a gun belt, ammunition, a box of cigars, and also pornography and sex toys. Others in the department who were present or to whom Burke later bragged about his actions also kept quiet and helped cover this up for years before Burke was finally caught. So they caught the guy who stole the bag, and essentially, I think he even might have called Burke a pervert or something like that. And Burke beat him badly, threatened his family, that he was going to keep quiet. And many other people in the department knew about this. In fact, Amy, this was actually, I believe this was the beginning of Alexis Linkletter and Billy Jensen, their podcast Unraveled. They did the Long Island serial killer. I want to say that this was someone Alexis knew, maybe a friend of hers or a friend of a friend. And this was kind of how they started their investigation in that podcast, which is also a deep dive and very, very good.
You listened to it?
I did. I listened to most of it. Yes, it was very good. After a federal investigation revealed that Burke's actions went way beyond this one act, with him paying sex workers regularly, and even having relations with them in police-issued vehicles. And there were other things as well. They said he regularly drank on the job, drove intoxicated. It appears that this was a very bad cop. And many believe that this corrupt top cop was the hindrance to the investigation into the murdered women because he wanted to keep federal agents out of his jurisdiction and keep the heat off of himself. He had refused their help on several occasions. Burke was also aided by former prosecutor Thomas Spoda and his top aide, Christopher McPartlin, who helped Burke cover up his crimes and others cover up crimes. And they were also prosecuted, and they received prison sentences of 5 years for their roles in the Suffolk County corruption crimes committed by Burke and other officers. So this was a very dark stain on the department and on really the investigation. Once Burke left, though, a new team took over, and Mary Gilbert would continue to apply pressure. And just as you know from Mary's legal team, John Ray, her lawyer, filed a civil suit against Peter Hackett, not against the other two, but the civil suit alleges that he improperly treated Shannan with medication that might have led to her demise.
What?
A very interesting theory here. Peter Hackett, the one who inserted himself, Shannan's mother, Mary, and her attorney, they feel that he was involved with her death, that he did know her, and that he likely gave her some type of substances that had something to do with her death. Whether or not he actually murdered her or just improperly treated her is kind of unclear. It's a very interesting suit because it's kind of vague in general, and I feel like it's more of, I think it's an information-seeking expedition. I think they want to get him to answer questions. Part of this suit has been dismissed, but part remains open in court to be resolved still. So interesting allegation here. And what about the other victims? Well, this is the part that you probably know and everyone else probably knows. On July 23rd, 2023, the police arrested 59-year-old architect, father of two, and husband Rex Heuermann, who lived in Massapequa Park, just a few miles from where I was raised. So the speculation that he was a local to the area was partly true. He was a local to Long Island, although not exactly to Oak Beach. However, Massapequa is not very far from that location. Rex Heuermann, you know, it's so interesting. Not only was I raised there, but I know the area so well. Like I remember riding my bike around that area where he lived with his family. And, you know, you never know when you could have someone, a Rex Heuermann, an actual serial killer, living in your own community. I'm not going to spend too much time on Rex Heuermann because the case is not necessarily about him, but let me just briefly tell you that he was caught using DNA analysis obtained from a discarded pizza crust also caught using cell phone records, and they had a description of him and his vehicle.
What was the first piece of evidence that led to them looking at him? Do we know?
They had phone records that were helpful and actually could have been utilized earlier. So I think the phone records, they had those, and there was a vehicle description. So I think it was the phone records and the vehicle description. When they put the two of them together, they came up with the suspect, but the DNA was the confirmatory evidence. And then further, when the police searched Heuermann's home, computer searches and other electronic devices revealed, a trove of evidence implicating him as the Long Island serial killer. Though initially charged with the murders of the 4 victims found in 2011 when the police were looking for Shannan Gilbert, Rex Heuermann has since been charged with 2 more murders, and one, in fact, dating back to 1993. So if you think about that, that would mean that they believe that he had been killing women or killing people for at least 18 years, 93 to 2011.
It kind of reminds me of BTK, just as far as like the profile of him, like just like living a quote normal life, right?
Yes. Well, I think that's what people don't realize. A lot of serial killers, they don't look like necessarily your monsters. Although I will say Rex Heuermann has been described by people as having a very ogre-like appearance. So for him, it might be different. However, yes, they live amongst us. Heuermann is being held without bail, and he recently asked the court for a change of venue in his case. The judge is considering that motion, but as of the time of this recording, no trial date has yet been set for him. But let me assure you, when it is, we will be watching.
You don't think he's going to take a plea, do you?
I do not think Rex Heuermann is going to take a plea. No, I think he's going to go to trial. But we'll see. There is a lot of evidence against him. But what about Shannan Gilbert? Is she a victim of Rex Heuermann? Most people think not, but let me cover the 3 prevailing theories about what happened to Shannan. First, there are some people that do believe that she was a victim of Rex Heuermann. She was a sex worker and she was his type. She was found in the general area in which the other victims were found. But let me just say that she wasn't found in very close proximity to those original 4 women. Also, those original 4 women were found in burlap sacks, and that's where they got DNA from, specifically a hair. Shannan's body was not found in a burlap sack. Shannan also had a driver. The other women did not. The other women had scheduled dates with Heuermann, but Heuermann was very careful to lure his victims to him alone. Shannan was not alone. So there are a number of similarities, but a number of differences. And also, there is no known connection between Shannan and Heuermann at this time. So that's still the first theory that we're dealing with. The second theory is the police theory, and some people also think this was possible, and that's that Shannan succumbed to an accident due to exposure or drowning. So this is the official police position as of now. So the theory is that Shannan, disoriented, tired, confused, possibly having ingested drugs that morning or having some type of mental health break, essentially ran to her death through the marsh, stripping her clothes along the way to her final resting place there.
I don't even like that that's a theory.
Oh, it's a significant theory. And I've heard others debate it. It's certainly possible, but I don't like it as well. And let me tell you, Mary hired famed pathologist Michael Baden, who we know, to perform an independent autopsy. And he concluded that Shannan's cause of death was consistent with homicidal strangulation, finding that her throat had a fracture in it.
Are they going to say she did that to herself too?
I think what they're saying is that he wasn't absolutely certain. It was his conclusion. He thought that he found some evidence of this. So I think the idea is also possibly perhaps she had an injury from ahead of time. I don't know that the police position will change on Shannan's case, but that's the official position now. Third theory here is that Shannan was murdered and her body was placed in the marsh. So Shannan was clearly afraid for her life that morning. She believes someone or more than one person was trying to hurt her. Now, Joseph Brewer was cleared by the police, but we also know now that that was a very corrupt police department. And I don't mean, by the way, that every police officer was corrupt in it. I certainly do not. But there was a regime of corrupt officers there. And it's been widely reported that Brewer and others in the community, both civilians and law enforcement, attended various sex parties with sex workers in the community. And that was not irregular for them. So, did something go wrong at one of these parties? By the way, they didn't speak to Brewer right away. So, was there someone else at his house with him that evening when Shannan was there? Was he or someone else he knew involved in Shannan's death? And was Peter Hackett involved in some way? These are very real possibilities, and I'm not sure at all why the police have discounted these theories, saying that they've cleared all of the suspects. Now, there are other possible explanations as well, but I chose to focus on the top 3 ones that I found repeatedly had come up. I'm sure some of our listeners, though, have others as well, and of course, they are welcome to share them with us. Okay, so let me talk about the aftermath a little bit here. There's a couple things that I bet are going to surprise you as well. First of all, the apprehension of Rex Heuermann, now referred to as always referred to as the Long Island serial killer, left many relieved, but also had others questioning why it took so long. A lot of the evidence had been there all along. It'd been available since the first women were found in 2011. But it seemed as if Burke, then corrupt police chief, did not want to analyze phone records that were available. Why? We can't say for sure.
Because maybe there's something in those records that wouldn't look good for him or others.
That is correct, or that is what has been said. The availability of evidence made public has been up for debate, so police in Suffolk County who took over after Burke was removed, they've made some evidence public. They made public a belt with initials in it a long time ago. But they also kept some of it under wraps. And, we both know that there are reasons to keep some evidence under wraps during an open investigation. So while they've been heavily criticized for that, there might be some reasons that we are unaware of. Whatever the other reason, though, they also would not make Shannan Gilbert's 911 call available to the public. They fought tooth and nail, and it wasn't until 2022 that call became available, and after much persistence from Mary Gilbert's family and her attorneys. Mary Gilbert never stopped fighting for her daughter Shannan, but very sadly, her own story had another tragic ending involving her daughter Sarah. Sarah had a history of serious trauma that led to many mental health challenges, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Sarah had delusions, and one of those delusions was that her mother Mary was a demon. She was also very unhappy with Mary, who had, I think informally, I'm not sure if it was, I know it was legally, but not permanently, taken custody of Sarah's son. Now, Mary initiated this step after Sarah drowned the family dog in front of her son.
Ooh.
And Mary had to have her hospitalized.
Oh, wow.
Yes, this was very traumatic.
How old was her son?
Young, about 3 or 4.
Okay.
When Sarah eventually returned home on a day in July 2016, she asked her mother Mary to come over, saying that she was having delusions again and she needed her mother. During that visit, Sarah took out a kitchen knife and stabbed Mary 227 times.
What?
Yes. Also hitting her in the head with a fire extinguisher and spraying the extinguisher into her mouth. She died.
Wow.
It was an awful death.
I did not see that coming.
No, and I really didn't know much about that as well.
Wow.
I knew that Mary Gilbert had died, but I didn't know that it was this type of brutal death.
Wow.
Now, Sarah's lawyer, actually the family lawyer, stayed with Sarah and argued insanity, noting her serious mental health trauma. But Sarah was found guilty of premeditated homicide, as there was evidence that she had planned the murder and invited her mother over to commit the crime.
Was she being medicated at the time for her mental illness, or was she off her medication?
I'm not sure if she was, to be honest.
Okay.
I know that she had recently been hospitalized, but I don't know if she stopped taking her medication. Regardless, she was found guilty and she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. It's a tragic ending for a family who worked so hard to find Shannan and then to find her killer.
Yeah.
But let me just say that the legacy of Mary and Shannan will never be forgotten, regardless of how they both died, because Mary used her voice to mobilize a police department, and it was, make no mistake, her dogged determination that led to the search for Shannan, which essentially revealed all these other victims. These victims are the ones who aren't usually discussed, right? The cases who receive so little attention because they're not missing middle or upper class white women.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't perfect victims, but make no mistake, they are victims. And Shannan Gilbert's death helped give these victims a voice that they likely never would have found without her. So I believe that is the legacy that Shannan and Mary both left.
Wow. So much tragedy.
And so much more to this story
Yeah.
than, you really knew, than I even knew
Yeah.
when I started looking into it. Now, I'd also like to say that the movie, I said it was a powerhouse of a film. And I really believed one of the wonderful things about this film was how much time it spent developing Mary as a person. So you got to know her, but also the other family members of the victim. You got to meet them and you got to see everything that they had to endure and the ways in which they were dismissed. However, but the ways in which they mobilized, they came together and they really helped propel this investigation. And I thought it was very humanizing. I liked the film because I thought, yes, it humanized the women. It humanized their families. You got to see them as more than just, the Gilgo Four, these names that we give them.
I hate those names.
I know. I do as well. But I thought that was why, again, I just enjoyed the film very much. And I thought it did a wonderful job of really telling the story of the true people behind it. I would highly encourage our listeners to watch it.
Is it a documentary or is it a drama based on a true story?
No, it's a drama.
It is?
It's a
Oh,
drama, but
okay.
it's very well done.
Okay.
Very, very well done. And it's on Netflix for anyone who would like to watch. And of course, feel free to share your feedback with us on today's film or any of the films we covered in our movie series.
I love these. I really enjoyed these movie series. I think we have to do this every year or maybe more.
I would say that I really enjoyed them as well. So yes, I think it was a great idea. And we hope our listeners enjoyed them as much as we did. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime. Sources for today's episode include People.com, New York Magazine, The Cut, the movie Lost Girls, CBS News, Unraveled the podcast, an episode of 48 Hours, an episode of Unresolved, and NBC News.